Welcome to the Pen Leader Podcast, where strategic leaders get straight to the topics, strengthening our awareness and sharpening our minds. The Pen Leader Podcast is produced by Roar, a production division of Mays & Associates Ltd. Find out more at www.maysassociatesltd.com. Now here is your award-winning host, Dr. Shanda Gore.
And welcome to the Pen Leader Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about innovation and safety. And I am so glad to have with me Mr. Shagmond Lowery, who is a national school safety advocate. He is the founder and president of Smart Guys Signs. He's a computer engineer by first trade and then an educator in the second part of his life. He has a bachelor's in computer science. He has certification as a career technical educator, and he is always working toward the betterment of children and those in schools. And he embarked on a school safety crusade to help keep children safe from bullying, cyberbullying, personal crisis, fighting, and school threats in elementary, middle, junior, high, and high schools. And so he is the founder, developer, creator of My Pal Schools, which is currently in 169 different schools around the United States, actually 7 different states. And it is a wonderful opportunity to help secure and create a safe environment within a school system. And so I'm so glad to have him with me. Welcome, Shagmond.
Oh, thank you for allowing me to be your guest today.
Yes, we're so glad to have you. So let's talk about that innovation that you have, and you're involved in a number of projects. You're a serial entrepreneur with that engineering background, computer engineering background. But can you talk to your innovation and what motivates you?
So what actually motivated me is this. When I was a kid, I'll never forget, we had our TV went down. And when the TV went down, we had a repairman come out and he took it all apart. And from that day on, I was just mesmerized. Like, how could he take all these screws out, put them back in, and then have the TV working like it was never broken? So from that point on, that got me started with the innovation side of things, where like I want to just know the ins and outs of everything. So that led me into the photography background. That led me into the coding background. It led me into the videography background. And from that point on, like I said, I became a computer engineer and then ultimately an educator to show other young adults how to go ahead and also hone in those kind of crafts. And then now we're here with the My Pal Schools app and a few others.
Mm-hmm. And this is unusual because, again, it is a full-fledged app that you've coded and developed yourself. Is that right?
That is correct.
And how in 169 different schools, how did that come about? And, again, what motivated you there?
Well, initially, I worked at a school district and we had a young man take a situation into his own hands, so to speak, and he brought a firearms to the school. So at the time I had children in the school, I just didn't like the way the situation played out with that school. And not so much how they handled it, but the time delay. So I was having a conversation with another educator, and she said, with all those skill sets you have, you should just create an app. So I took her up on our offer and I created My Pal Schools. So I started with a pilot school with my daughter's school, and then I said I can do more. So I went ahead and I started reaching out to my old alma mater. So I started with those, and I started reaching out to different schools in the community I was in. Then I jumped on LinkedIn and started reaching out to different superintendents and safety administrators and saying, hey, look, I created a school safety app that can keep your children safe from situations of bullying, cyberbullying, personal crisis, fighting, and school threats. And if you give me an opportunity, I can come out to the school and talk about it. And they gave me the opportunity to come to different schools. So from Illinois to Indiana to Michigan to Georgia to Texas to Virginia to Oklahoma, they gave me opportunities to come out and present to them and say, hey, look, this bullying and this cyberbullying situation is a major deal, especially post-pandemic. So now you're going to have something in place that keeps these children safe.
Mm-hmm. And that's another thing, too, the innovation part with developing the app and then helping with safety. And there have been so many stories, unfortunately, in the news where someone was bullied and they decided to, like you said, take situations into their own hands. As an innovator, a serial entrepreneur. What advice are you giving to those that see a problem, a challenge, and want to venture out and try to solve it? What advice would you give them?
So on the entrepreneurial side of things, you need to go ahead. It's 5 steps that I tell people, and I'll give you a statistic. There's this rule. 100 people are going to have an idea. You're going to lose 50 of those 100 when they write it down. You're going to lose 30 of that 50 when they write it down, do the research, really look into it and say, how can I get this organization started, whether it's an corporation, whether it's a non-for-profit, whether it's an LLC. And then from that number, you'll be at step 4. At step 4, you get down to 7 people who are going to execute on doing the paperwork, getting the business finalized, getting the proper Dun and Bradstreet account numbers and things like that, taking care of articles of incorporation. And then from that point on, you'll get to the number of 2 or 3 where they go ahead and actually execute, whether they have an event, whether they receive an invoice, et cetera, et cetera. So I try to teach that concept to people that want to get into the entrepreneurial world where they can capitalize on that statistic and say, hey, look, are we just doing this for a hobby or are we really trying to execute this idea?
Mm-hmm. I know that we do a lot of coaching with our company with executives, trying to get to the heart of their why, and then making sure that their strategic planning is around why they went into the role as it is, and then what do they foresee in the future. And that's really so very important. I think even in your entrepreneurial journey and doing some research, you're housed in Illinois right now. You're seeing different dynamics depending on where you are and which school system. But, what are the top 3 things that you suggest someone needs to keep in mind when they're going for something that's not even out there in the market yet?
So with the 5 is this. First and foremost, you got to drown out the noise. If you have an idea, you have to really write it down and do your research, and then you'll ask people, hey, I got this idea, this concept, see what they think. If you're getting too much negative feedback, either it's a great idea or you might want to check it out. So you have to get yourself in a tunnel vision mindset to say, hey, look, I got this idea, now let me get to it. So now you've asked people what they think about it, you got your feedback. Next, I say is executing, putting everything down and saying, what can my idea do to change the world or make a difference? And you have to ask yourself that is step 2. So now I got this idea. Okay, I know it can do this. Let's just say it can help homeless people. So now you got it in place. You got the feedback you want to get, whether positive or negative, whether constructive or constructive criticism. The last thing is the execution part and being determined and real with yourself. See, a lot of times I think people listen to people's input too much. They got to say, look, you know what? I'll either go ahead and make it successful or I'll fail, but I always chance myself to go ahead and do it, because at the end of the night, a lot of people are going to have a lot of regrets about stuff they didn't do. But if you did it, and whether you were successful or failed, you can always say, I took a chance at it and here was my outcome.
I think you saw a need, a huge gap. Someone even suggested to you should create an app for that, knowing full well that you had a coding background and you could do that. And a number of people might say, I wish I would have created an app, but they don't have the skill set. Where would somebody start to be innovative that way and to pursue an app? What would you suggest?
So I would suggest this. First, I would suggest them get to the understanding of the different type of apps. You have different type of apps. I'll give you an example for 3. You have web-based apps, you have your Google Play apps, and you have your App Store on the Apple platform app. So now you have to understand which platform are you going to use. If you do a web-based, it's open to everybody. If you do the Google Play Store apps, then that's strictly for Android. If you do the App Store apps, that's strictly for Apple. So a lot of times I'll tell people, do your research on that and how these pipelines go, because when you do physical apps like the Play Store or Apple, that's going to put a time delay in it. So now if you're delivering food or you're placing orders for merchandise and things like that, can you afford to have that time delay? So they need to do the research and market going on now in society we live in. Everything's almost in a rush. So now they're going to have that. So you go on the internet, they can go on YouTube, they can look at books and understand how these apps work to be successful. And then they can determine what app and what platform might work best for them.
Mm-hmm. I know that it has been confusing, and I know the world of apps can be very expensive too. So even knowing should you have an app, sometimes that's a question. Now, tied to safety, again, you are addressing a major challenge that is, again, unfortunately, we see in the news, it pops up, and it always seems to root back most of the time to bullying. What suggestions would you say to those that are leaders of schools that have some of these challenges? And I'll even say this, leaders of businesses that may have some those that are disgruntled, and there may be a safety problem. What What would you suggest?
So we have to take the empathetic approach. And I teach a program, like I said, with the Map House schools called Invisible Bullying. And we have to understand what the adult side of things first. That I always ask people this question. Can you remember the person that bullied you? And every time I ask that question, everybody raises their hand. They never forget the person that bullied them because that's a traumatic experience, okay? Now, when you're younger, you just never forget. And what happens, a lot of people are trying to make up for that situation where they seem vulnerable from a child as an adult. And sometimes you have situations where the bully becomes the bully. So now I tell people, take the empathetic approach. I always ask children, for example, if your friend was bullying somebody, would you speak up? Sometimes they say yes, sometimes they say no. I say, but now let me ask you this. If somebody was bullying your best friend, would you want somebody to speak up? They say absolutely. And that's the empathetic approach, because when it's somebody I love or care about, well, it's not funny. But now if it's a stranger or somebody I barely know or somebody that might look like this or look like that, well, it's cool. So now we start opening their eyes up to saying, hey, look, it's not cool for nobody, because these traumas stay with you. And not only do they stay with you from a child to a teenager to an adult, a lot of people take it with them. I'll give you a prime example. I was in an event and I met a CEO of a company, and his approach on bullying was just like terrible, but I could tell that he had been a victim. And I say, hey, look, let me tell you this. The way you run your company is a reflection of you and a reflection you've been bullied. And I say, people are not going to go ahead and work well with you when you're bullying them at work, especially adults, okay? So you're going to have a high turnover ratio. You're going to have low work performance. But now when you motivate them and empathize with them and say, hey, look, I understand. I've been here. I've been there. I've been in your situation. Well, now you'll get the best results out of them.
Mm-hmm. We talk about pen leaders and being sharp with their experience and education. And there's a level of self-awareness which comes into that strength of character. And what I'm hearing too, is that CEO needed to understand that the implications of what happened to him in the past, he was really deflecting that back out onto his own company. And that takes some self-awareness. And if you can't find the self-awareness, you need somebody to constructively tell you that. How was his response to that?
You know, it took him for a ride for a moment. And what I mean by that, it kind of shocked him a little bit that somebody would be straightforward with. But I feel in today's society, we got to be straightforward with people. It's a lot of misinformation going on. And we have to tell people, look, if I'm your friend or associate, look, that red shirt might not be the best for that job. So with that CEO, I had to explain to him, this attitude you're taking, this bombarding approach you're taking, where you're darn near bullying your employees or dangling their jobs over their head, that's not the best approach. And that's not going to make your bottom line increase. So I explained to him, hey, look, and think about this. If you come in and say, hey, look, everybody, today we're going to have donuts and let's have an open session where we could talk about what's going on, and you'll have a better understanding, because a lot of times in these corporate world jobs, we don't know what a person went through before they got to work. Mm-hmm. All we want them to do is just come to work and start working. No, you might have had a situation where your kid wasn't feeling good. You might have had a situation where somebody almost ran into your car. You might have had a situation where you got caught by a train. You might have had an allergy attack. You might have had a bad evening. Whatever the case is, we have to take the approach where people need to understand that, hey, look, we don't know what's going on with this person, so let me be empathetic to where they're coming from, or what they might have been through. And that makes better performance for employees and can also help the CEO out as well.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask you, because there's a number of great notes right there, is how would you rank the importance of strength of the character, and then that straightforwardness about strategic planning and ability to pivot, which you have done, sounds like several times, and then the sharpness of having that education experience to lead?
Well, yes, we have to be straightforward. Me and my father, rest his soul, when he was alive, we had this understanding. He said, son, I'm always going to give it to you straight, because if I'm sugarcoating it for you, you're not going to be the best man you can be. With you being my son, you always give it to me straight so I can be the best individual I can be. And that's the approach I take. And that's the greatest strength you can have, is being straightforward with people, because if the king is running around unclothed, then the king looks like a fool. But now if somebody says, hey, king, I know you're in a power position where you run this kingdom, but you don't have any clothes on, then that helps people out. So the best strength is telling people straight ahead, because a lot of times sugarcoating stuff for people, when they're in the wrong, they're in the wrong. And when they're right, they're right. So we got to give them their praise when they're right. But when they're wrong, we got to point it out and say, hey, look, that wasn't your best move, or that wasn't your best approach. And it can hurt you on the backhand side. And I'm telling you that as a friend, as an associate, as a loved one, that you need to make a modification. And when you give it to people straight, they always respect you and they'll always give it to you straightforward as well.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like straightforward. And then how would you rank the strength and the sharpness?
Well, the sharpness now, that's a thing where that sharpness can come at any point. Now, everybody has a library in their pocket, in their lap, on their nightstand, and that's pretty much their phone. And with the sharpness, you can always research. You can always look at different things that you might want to do as an entrepreneur. And go ahead. YouTube has a million videos on a million different things. So if you want to be the best cake maker possible, it's a million videos out here. It's a million ebooks out here. It's a million EPUBs out here that will tell you how to do that. So that strength and that sharpness is going to come from you taking the time to do your research and your due diligence and make yourself the best. So a lot of times people have to say, listen, I want to be the best person I can be, and sharpening my mind and my strength when I'm doing my research. I'm checking things out. I'm making sure I make the right moves to make sure you're the sharpest individual, and sharpening your craft is the greatest thing you can do and one of the top.
Mm-hmm. Now, you have won a number of awards and been recognized for your work with My Pals School across the United States. What is your most accomplished? What do you find the most valuable amongst those awards?
I won an award from the Chicago Archdiocese. I won award from the Chicago Bears. I won an award from the Chicago Innovation Technology Award. But I'll be honest with you, the greatest award I received is I went to a school one time and I spoke about the bullying. I talked about how bullying is bad. And all the kids say, can I take a picture with you? Can I give you a fist bump? And mind you, I got the physical plaques for all these different awards, jerseys, and all that kind of stuff at home. But the kids just want to take a picture with somebody that's trying to keep them safe. Mm-hmm. Was probably the best, non-monetary award I could have received. I mean, kids just taking pictures. You know what? Can you be my superhero? Can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? Can I call on you when? That was just everything for me. So like I say, the monetary awards are great. I got the glass trophies, I got the jerseys and all that stuff. But the kids knowing that somebody truly cares about them was the greatest award I've ever received, non-monetary.
Excellent. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. I've got really one last question because you sound like you barely have time to rest. But I have to ask you, what are you reading and watching?
So reading, I read a lot of technology stuff. So I go on the internet and I read technology and I try to make sure. So I read it's called cnet.com and they tell you about the new technology. I try to make sure I'm steps ahead of what's coming out. So I read a lot of their publications on the internet about all new and innovative things coming out, smart homes, self-driving cars, self-driving taxis. So I read that. As far as what I watch a lot of photography videos on YouTube. So with me being an educator of photography, I try to just make sure I'm the best photographer, videographer as well. And I watch a lot of videos about that just to make sure, because I think practice makes perfect. But I think the best thing you can do when you're talking about practice or honing in on your skill is to know this stuff on the top of your head. Just so if somebody says, how do I run a successful podcast? You can say, well, look, you know what? You're going to need a signal strength of 128 megahertz. You're going to need this kind of bandwidth. And when you say it off the top of your head, that lets you know that you've reached to the point where you can tell it in your sleep. So that's what I'll read as far as technology-wise, and that's pretty much what I'll watch as far as visual-wise.
Excellent. So thank you for that. I'm always curious because I'm thinking, are you reading coding books? I'm like, are you staying when you say you're stuff? So it's at least I can connect with that part and I can find CNET and check that out. But I figured your reading wasn't that dry, but I'm glad that it's not.
Oh yeah. Because like I said, when you start reading them coding books, you might as well be looking at hieroglyphics. I mean, that's it. But like I said, you read something simple. Okay, hey, look, what makes this smart light work? Or look, they got the new smart bathtub that runs your water for your house. You're like, okay, that's cool. It's not all the techie stuff where you do colon, H colon / stuff like that.
Well, I thank you for that. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
All right. Thanks for having me as a guest.
And for our listeners out there, thank you so much for listening and sharing the show. We appreciate you as well. Just as a reminder, the Pin Leader Path, identifying, engaging, and developing effective human and AI leader for an organizational culture is due out March of 2025. Don't forget to sign up for the book. We, again, appreciate your feedback at info@mazeassociatesltd.com. And until next time.
The Pin Leader podcast is hosted by Dr. Shanda Gore and brought to you by Maze & Associates Ltd, creating customized solutions for growth in the areas of leadership development, strategic planning, and culture building, Find out more at www.mazeassociatesltd.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the Pen Leader podcast and share with others.